Hey there, I'm Rachel Ehring, and you're listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. Get inspired as we discuss creative resources, trends in piano pedagogy, ways to grow your income and streamline your studio, and new ways to engage your students each week. If you are a teacher who wants to go beyond the method books to create an innovative studio that fosters lifelong music makers, you've come to the right place. Hello, piano teachers. Welcome to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'm really excited about today's episode. It's a little different than most of the other episodes I've done, and we are going off of the topic of the month for this episode. But today's episode will actually give you a little preview of a topic that we're going to be doing later in the summer about the business of being a piano teacher. My guest today is Ashlee Young, and we are going to be talking about creating content, particularly in the online space, and how to create content that grabs people's attention and that converts them into customers. I've connected with Ashlee recently on Instagram and through listening to her podcast, and I've learned so much from her about how to run a business. I think that you are really going to enjoy today's episode. Here's a little bit about Ashlee. Ashlee Young is a pianist and entrepreneur that is all about practicing and doing business smarter, not harder. She educates adult piano players about effective and efficient piano practice through her YouTube channel, as well as courses and her program, Casual to Confident Piano Player, and works with service-based entrepreneurs to help them scale and streamline their businesses through her podcast and private coaching. Here's my interview with Ashlee. Hi, Ashlee. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited to be talking with you today. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your piano teaching business?
Sure. Hello, Rachel. Thank you so much for having me. I've really been looking forward to this interview. And for those of you that I haven't met before, I'm Ashlee, and my piano teaching business has evolved over the years, but currently what I'm doing is working with piano players through a variety of online formats to help them learn how to practice smarter, not harder, all with the goal of being able to fully express themselves at the piano, which can be really difficult when you are newer to the journey or when you haven't learned how to learn properly. The other part of my business is that I help piano teachers as well as other service-based entrepreneurs learn how to scale and streamline their businesses so that they can work towards creating a business that really works for the lifestyle that they want and for like their dream life versus letting their business run their life.
So if I'm understanding correctly, you're no longer teaching one-on-one piano lessons, but you did that for a long time, right? Can you tell us a little bit about the journey that led you to where you are today?
Sure. Yes. So I have played the piano for a long time. I started when I was 4. And I went to school for piano performance. I got an undergraduate degree and a graduate degree in classical piano performance. And I started teaching in college. I was really lucky. Well, that's not true. I actually taught a couple neighborhood kids in high school. But then in college, I started teaching more officially when I was really lucky to have an instructor who found out that I was working at a coffee shop and at a local restaurant. And she was like, no. You need more time to practice. You need to open up a studio. I will mentor you. I will kind of teach you how to open a studio, how to teach. And that will be a way for you to support yourself while you go to school at a much higher hourly rate and also more directly related to what it is you want to do. And so once I started teaching in college, I never really stopped. I taught all the way through college, all the way through grad school. And then once I graduated, I officially opened my first studio, that I wasn't in school. That was kind of my main source of income for many, many years. And then eventually I got a college teaching job. I taught preschool music. I feel like if there is a way to teach piano, I've done
it. Nice. And then what led you to where you are, where you're teaching online students and then helping piano teachers? How did you get out of teaching one-on-ones privately?
Yeah. So honestly, for me, everything changed in the pandemic. I know those were really tumultuous times. And people for a long time had been saying to me, you should start a YouTube channel or you should do online courses. But to be honest, before the pandemic, I was really traditional. My education was classical piano performance. I didn't have experience with technology. I think I had to take 1 or 2 semesters of a recording technology in college. like a class that taught recording technology. So I knew how to set up microphones. I knew how to like record performances, but I didn't know how to edit videos. I myself personally was not on social media. I mean, I had profiles, but I like never was a social media person. And so I was really hesitant to ever dive into that world. And then when the pandemic happened, I was teaching at a local college and I got a lot of training on how to teach online because I had to be able to teach the college classes online. So once I went through that training and that excuse was no longer valid, I was like, why would I not also do this for myself? So in the summer of 2021, well, I guess backing up, in the pandemic, my studio got really busy and I ended up hiring a couple of other teachers to teach online lessons through my studio. And then in the summer of 2021, I finally took the plunge and was like, I'm starting a YouTube channel. I'm doing it. And that's when it started for me. And that's when everything shifted. And it was a long, I guess looking back, it doesn't sound long, but when I was in it, it felt like a really long process to not teach one-on-ones anymore. It took me about a year. I decided like, okay, in a year, I don't want to be doing one-on-ones anymore. I want to have all of my time to devote to like creative online business endeavors. And it was like basically once a month, I would let go of a family, and I kind of calculated it. And it was scary because I didn't always have the income to replace the one-on-one lessons. But I firmly believed that like, if I literally and figuratively created space, I'm doing air quotes here, by removing those families from my schedule, that space would have to be filled with something else. Right. And so it did work out, but it was terrifying and scary. And it was officially summer of 2023, I stopped teaching one-on-one. And then I actually closed the doors to the one-on-one part of my studio and like didn't have any other teachers working for me at the beginning of this year.
Okay. Yeah. So it can be a scary place to be when you know you need more time and you know that you could use that time to be creative and do other things in your business, but then you have to maybe give up some like real actual income to get that time, right? And create that space. So it sounds like you took a little leap of faith.
Yes, it felt like a series of like lots of leaps of faith. And I think I know the feeling of like, well, I don't actually have the money like to let go of these students, but then, doing it anyway, it built trust for sure.
Yes. So now you have a YouTube channel that has taken off. You have your podcast, which we'll talk a little bit about. You have some online courses. So I wanted to invite you here today to talk specifically about creating content because you're doing a lot of that. And I know that you've learned a lot and you're doing it really well. So I think teachers are going to learn so much from you today about how to create content. But let's talk a little bit about what that even means. What is content creation and why should piano teachers care about it?
Ooh, I love this question. And thank you for the kind words. So I think of content creation as kind of the modern day storefront, right? And if you think about the way that some businesses still work and some studios still work, it's like people will drive by your location and they'll see your sign. Or like when I had a private studio, I had a house on a busy street. And so I had like a literal sign in my front yard, in my lawn. And I would get a lot of students that way and a lot of inquiries that way. And if there's an element of you wanting to either have more reach in your local community or in the online world and kind of like without boundaries, have a reach all over the world, then content creation is like that storefront. And to me, well, I'm sure we'll get into the details of this, but the platform doesn't matter as much as the quality and the consistency with the content.
So you mentioned about the storefront and kind of using it as, I guess, advertising in the online space. What are some of the other reasons that piano teachers might want to create content online?
So one of the things that I don't think a lot of people talk about is that I think content creation is a really beautiful way to learn how to teach in other ways. So similarly to anyone who experienced that transition of moving online during the pandemic, we all had to figure out like, oh my gosh, how do we make this work in a completely different format? And so for some people that was, at the same time in Zoom one-on-one. For some people that was like asynchronous, so they were recording videos. And with content creation, you have all of these different ways that you can experiment getting the point across. And I think as an instructor, that's one of the things that I've always loved about teaching in any format is how can I use my creativity to figure out how to get this concept to resonate with this particular student or with this particular class. And so with content creation, you can do that on a much larger scale. And I'm at the point now where I really think of content as like, it's a creative outlet. I get to figure out like, okay, what works, what doesn't work, what resonates, what doesn't resonate, and how can I communicate this either using video or audio or by showing or by telling. And like, it's just a wonderful medium to be creative in that way.
Yeah. And I think that's why a lot of piano teachers are kind of drawn to it, because we're all creative, we're all teachers. And so it's kind of a natural end for that creativity and that teaching, right? To be doing that in the online space.
Absolutely.
What are some of the goals that teachers should be thinking about when they want to create content?
Okay, this is such a great question. And I think I have some differing opinions about this. I've been talking to coaching clients recently and a little bit on my podcast as well about this topic, because I think there's a lot of misconceptions about content creation and about what it should be and how often you have to do it and what you need to pay attention to. And the things that I like to tell people about this topic are that, one, the platform doesn't matter. The platform and the algorithm doesn't really matter. What matters is the consistency. And I think if you go back to the analogy of like your content on whichever platform you choose being your storefront, if you think about your favorite store, you likely know the hours that they're open, and you likely know like kind of what you're going to experience when you go there. Maybe sometimes you have more luck and you walk out with lots of new pieces, and maybe sometimes you don't, but you have like an idea of what to expect. And one of the biggest mistakes that I see people making is with their content, they're not consistent. And to me, that's like, if you have a storefront and like sometimes you're open and sometimes you're not, and sometimes you're following the hours that you posted on Google and sometimes you're not. And sometimes your people come and you have clothes, and the next time they come and you have like home goods. You know what I mean? Like, it's just this inconsistency that automatically doesn't build trust with the people that are coming to look at your content. So the consistency is important, way more so than the platform or the algorithm. And then beyond that, beyond the consistency, like once you are consistent with your content, then the goal gets to elevate a little bit. And the goal is like, what is the purpose of your content creation? And I think, of course, with my content, I want to build community. I want to connect with people. That's always been a goal of mine, is to genuinely make and foster those connections. But at the end of the day, because I'm also using content creation for marketing and sales, my goal is to make money in my business. And so at a certain point, like that is how I measure the success of my content, because I could be on Instagram or on YouTube all day, every day, creating the best content. But if I'm not getting any sales or the revenue isn't increasing in my business, then it's clear that my content isn't actually accomplishing the goal. I don't want to tell teachers what goal they should have, but I think it's important to think about really, truly, what is your goal? I think oftentimes it is to bring in more customers, to bring in more business. And if your content isn't doing that for you, then that's a sign that you need to evaluate your strategy.
Yeah. And maybe can you talk a little bit about goal setting and what makes for a good goal, or give us an example of a good goal?
Yeah, I think so. When I do goal setting, I tend to go really zoomed out. So I always like to ask people, like, if you envision yourself 10 years in the future, what does your life look like? Like at that point, what is your business? And this allows people to get out of their head a little bit, because 10 years is like so far away that it seems like you could do, whatever you want. And it also removes a lot of the limiting beliefs, because if I ask someone what you want to be doing in 6 months, automatically people kind of like dampen down their dreams. So if you go 10 years in the future and think about, what does your life look like? How do you feel? How much are you working? What does your business look like? And then right now, start building towards that, right? Don't wait until 9 years from now. Start building towards that 10-year future you right now. And if your vision, like, for example, part of my vision is always like, I'm not working very much, right? I'm not working very much. And so that helps me right now prioritize, okay, if in 10 years, I know that I want to be working 5 hours a week, I'm not taking on things right now that are adding more time to my schedule without knowing that eventually I can work them out of my schedule, right? So that is kind of how I go about goal setting. And so with in relation to content, I think thinking about like, what are your ultimate business goals? a lot of times people can get hung up on like the vanity metrics of like, oh, I need to hit X number of followers. I need to hit X number of comments or X number of engagement. And I think analytics on any social media platform are really misleading because implied in the analytics are the things you should care about, but the platforms are showing you what they want you to see to keep you on the platform versus like knowing what your goals are and like learning how to look at your analytics to see if they're helping you reach your personal goals for your business.
Yeah. Do you have any tips for getting past those analytics, like not getting hung up on the subscribers and the followers?
I don't know if this is a tip, but the thing that I like to keep in mind is that good content and consistency will always win. So people like it is easy to get hung up on like, oh, YouTube changed their algorithm, or like now they're doing this thing differently, or now they're pushing out new creators, or now but I think really at the end of the day, because it's not a day-to-day game, it's like a forever strategy. If you can come into it with that mindset, it makes it a little easier to kind of like zoom out. So don't get caught up on the day-to-day analytics of like how many likes you got in a day or how many subscribers you got or followers you got in a month. Think back to that 10-year goal and know that if your 10-year goal is to work less, that means you're going to be on these platforms for 10 years, right? And if you're consistent, the trajectory has no choice but to go up because the algorithm, whatever it is, will again always favor that consistency and always favor like the people that can trust you and that keep coming back to you.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're talking about this today, Ashlee. Full disclosure, you and I had a one-on-one coaching session with you last week. And I think my biggest takeaway was this consistency aspect, that consistency will win. It was so encouraging to me when you said, if you are consistent, you'll be successful. Like that was the biggest takeaway for me from that coaching session. So I'm glad that we get to talk about it again here today.
I'm so glad. I think the analogy, and I'll share this with the listeners too, that I use with you and that I will often use because it resonates so much for us musicians, is like if a student were to come to you and say, I want to learn the Moonlight Sonata, how long will it take? Like as an instructor, I could not in good conscience tell them exactly how long because I need to know like, well, okay, where are you? How much do you know? How much are you practicing? But what I could tell them is that if they come to lessons and they show up consistently and they practice regularly, they will eventually get there, right? And then once like they're practicing regularly, of course we go in and we help them get there more effectively and more efficiently. But like they will get there if they just don't stop practicing. Eventually they'll get there. And I think the same is true with content. The same is true with your business goals. If you just don't stop, you will eventually get there. If it's not a matter of like, if you can do it, but just when and how, right?
Yes. So let's get into the nuts and bolts of it a little bit. What makes content stand out online in a really noisy space? Feels cluttered sometimes. Like, what do I have to bring to the table that no one else has already done?
Yeah. So one of the questions that I often ask people to help them get to the bottom of this is like, what are your core beliefs that you know to be true for you? And how can you communicate those online? So one of the best ways to stand out online is to actually be really, what is the word I'm looking for? Like stand your solid ground and have conviction in what you're saying. So an example of this is like, I work with a lot of adult piano players, and I firmly believe that rhythm, when it comes to like counting and using the metronome, it's not just about rhythm. It's actually about like the structure and how your brain makes sense of music inside. And so I talk about that often online of like, you have to count out loud. Rhythm is so important and it's not just about rhythm. And that is something that not all teachers agree with. There are some teachers that believe that counting isn't that important, or that it's especially not important when you're a beginner. And so that's okay. Everybody's allowed to believe what they want to believe. And I don't have any interest in engaging in an argument about it because everybody's allowed to believe what they want to believe. But I say that online, right? I say, this is what I believe and this is what you have to do, in my opinion. And so I think people like sometimes are a little bit afraid to be polarizing like that or to speak up, especially if their belief is contradicting to the mainstream or contradicting to what other people think. But I think that actually makes you stand out, because people see that and they resonate with it, or they start to see you help them change their mind. And that's a really powerful tool in working with potential customers, is like helping people believe that things are possible for them in the ways that you know will work, right?
Yeah, that's a great point. Don't be afraid to have an unpopular opinion, right?
Yeah. And then don't be afraid also to speak more specifically to a specific person. And this, I know this came up for me a lot when I was first creating content, because I think as musicians, we have big hearts. Like, we want to include everybody, and we want to make sure that we're not making anybody feel bad, or that we're not like leaving anybody out in the content that we create. But the more that you actually get really specific, the easier it is for your people to find you. And so when I first started online, I was like, well, I know I want to work with adult piano players, but I'm not going to, I don't want, like, if there's teenagers, that's fine. And I know I don't really want to work with beginners, but if there's beginners, it's okay. And so early on in my YouTube days, like, there's videos that are for advanced people, there's videos that are for beginners. But imagine as like the person coming to the YouTube channel, you're confused, right? You're like, well, who is this channel for? I don't get it. Like, some of the videos are for beginners, some of them are for advanced people. And so eventually I had to like just really narrow in and be like, no, I work with adult piano players, more specifically, who are not beginners, more specifically, who took lessons as a kid and are back at it, more specifically, who like also maybe have learned on their own a little bit and now want a teacher, right? And that's like a very, very specific person. And because I now speak directly to that person, they know when they find me that I am for them.
Yeah. And if you think of it from your audience perspective, like it when that person finds you, they're like, oh, this person really gets me. You think of a video you've watched where the person was a mom or another piano teacher, whatever it is that you can relate to. And you're like, oh yeah, this person knows where I'm at. They know what I'm struggling with, and they can get me to the next level.
Exactly. And it's scary. Like, I'll validate that. It's really scary to like get more convicted and to speak more directly to one person, because there's always the fear of like, what are other people going to think? What if nobody resonates with it? And that happened more recently for me with my podcast of like, and I'm still in that journey of like how much to share and, what to share. And every time I'm scared to share something, inevitably I get a few Instagram messages that are like, oh my gosh, it's so cool that you're into this too. Or I didn't realize this about you. Me too. And so it's like, it allows you to make those more personal connections also, the more you start being more specific.
Yeah. I love that you have been so open and vulnerable on your podcast. I enjoy listening to it. And I feel like, I don't know, it feels like you're talking to like a small little group of piano teachers, even though I'm sure it's lots of piano teachers. But it feels like the things you share are things you would share if we went to coffee or something. Has that been an intentional decision on your part?
It is. And I think it has to be, because all of my favorite podcasts and the ones that have really like changed my life in the most profound ways are podcasts like that, where it's not like, oh, I'm going to show you how to do this thing because I'm perfect at it, but more like, I'm going to bring you along the journey because I'm not perfect at it, but maybe you can learn from me. And so it has been intentional, and it's allowed me to let go of some of the like perfectionism or feeling like each episode needs to be perfect. Like, I have to think about it as like, okay, I'm just turning on the mic and I'm talking to a friend. And I think for teachers out there that want to create content too, knowing yourself and coming up with the ways that you can be successful with it. Like, I know that I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I call myself a recovering perfectionist because I'm aware of it. So I try to keep it in check. But I had to say with my podcast, like, I don't edit it. Like, it's not, and even now my assistant does it, but like I tell her, leave stuff in there, right? Like, if I mess up, if I trip over my words, leave it in there, because the whole reason I'm able to show up and do it is that I know it's allowed to be imperfect.
I think that it makes it so much more relatable. And I guess with your podcast, I feel like I can see myself in you, but you're farther down the road. So sometimes when I listen to these, really big business podcasts who are making 7 figures, I can't see myself in them. I'm like, you guys have so many resources. You have a team. You have all of this. I don't know. I mean, yes, it can be helpful and I can get, tips from that. But when I listen to you, I'm like, okay, Ashlee was exactly where I am maybe a year or 2 ago. And so I can see myself and sort of see the road to the future, I guess, and to what I want to create in the future. So I really love that about your podcast.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. I want to ask you another question about content, though. What mistakes do you see teachers making in their digital content creation?
Ooh, okay, that's a good question. Okay, so I'll speak to one, and then we'll see what comes after this one. But one of them that I think is a tough one is making sure. So I guess if I'm presenting it as a mistake, I would say the mistake of maybe not being intentional enough. And what I mean by that is I know it's really challenging because it's really easy to get caught on like, okay, should I use my personal profile or should I create a business profile? And like, and a lot of people like I consider mine to be more of a personal brand. Like I do have, it's Ashlee Young Music Studio, but it's my name in it. And so how much to share that's personal, how much to share that's business. And I think there's a beautiful way to do both. But I think if we come back to that storefront analogy, remembering that like the things that you post, let's take Instagram, for example, the things that you post on your feed. So like reels or posts or carousels, those live there forever unless you delete them. And so making sure that you are always posting content kind of with the intention of like, okay, if someone were to come to my storefront, like, is this something that I would want them to see forever? Right. And maybe a part of your personal brand is that you share family stuff on there. And that's totally fine. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. But then maybe just keeping that in mind, right? And then perhaps using stories for like the stories expire after 24 hours. So I always think of like the feed is the more businessy stuff, the stuff that like every piece of content is, I don't want to say curated because it's not curated, but it's like created in a way to help someone feel or learn something. Right. And then the stories are where I can share more of that personal stuff that like disappears after 24 hours. And so if people really want to get to know me, they can come to the stories versus they'll know me in the stuff that's on the feed and the reels, but like a little more of the like me speaking directly to the customers.
Yeah, I like to do that too. I really like the stories and how you can just kind of throw something up there. You know, it's not going to live forever. It can be personal. It can be, you know, whatever, like what you had for dinner or something, you know, your dog or whatever. My dog makes a lot of appearances in my stories. Yes. And then my feed is the more intentional stuff, the businessy type stuff. So that's a really good one. Are there any other mistakes you want to mention that you see?
Yeah, I would say the other number, well, I might talk about two, but first, call to actions. So I think there's a lot of time spent thinking about, oh, I don't want to be too salesy. I don't want to be too this. I don't want to be too that. And so I have to do a certain number of posts a week that just are like nurturing posts or engagement posts. And I've seen the recommendations of like, oh, well, 80% of your content should be engagement and then 20% should have a call to action and that kind of stuff. But the way that I view content is that every single piece of content has a purpose. And the purpose is to help someone overcome an objection or help them learn something or help them feel inspired. And therefore, every single post should have a call to action. And that doesn't mean that every call to action needs to be like, buy this thing. Those are not the best types of call to actions anyway. But getting way stronger in your ability to have a call to action to move the people in your community to take action. So drop a heart if this resonates, or what, you know, asking an open-ended question and saying, comment below with your answer. And like being very specific and clear about the directions that you are giving to the people engaging in your post so that they get used to seeing that from you. Because then when you do have the call to actions that are, you know, I have this free thing that you can download, or I'm teaching a free class, or I have this course for sale, people already know to expect that from you. And it doesn't feel like you're switching between content that is quote unquote selling versus other content. All content is selling. And it's just a matter, I mean, not in a bad way, but like all content should be effectively like changing people in some way. And so that's one of the other mistakes is like when people think of call to action content versus not, content becomes really fluffy and then nobody cares about it, right? So thinking of every single post as having a purpose of like educating or inspiring or making someone feel something different. And that's when you really start to create that potent content that like moves people to take action.
Yeah, that's great advice. So thinking of the call to action not as, you know, buy this thing, but it could be something simple. Like you said, does this resonate with you? Or how have you used this in your teaching? Or I don't know, you can throw out some other examples if you want, but.
And then I think like always guiding the reader. It's funny because even like, how have you used this in teaching? And then not forgetting to add the like comment below with your answer. Because it's so funny the different engagement you'll get when you like literally just tell people what to do as though they were a student, right? And I think we all know how to do that, but it's scary to do that online for some reason.
It is. And you have to get past that fear of what if nobody comments, right?
I mean, the reality, I think it's a blessing and a curse. I think you and I talked about this a little bit, but like when I first started my YouTube channel, like 4 people watched the first video. And on the one hand, it's like, oh man, I put so much time and energy into this video and only 4 people watched it. But on the other hand, it's kind of this beautiful thing where like, you get to find your voice and you get to get better at it before there's more people watching it. So again, like not getting caught up in the vanity metrics, even if nobody comments, that's totally fine. Nobody noticed that nobody commented. Nobody noticed. Everybody is too worried about themselves.
That's true. We're all over here trying to get people to comment on our posts.
Exactly.
Right?
I'm on YouTube and Instagram mainly. Those are my 2 main platforms. And YouTube was long before Instagram. And I love both platforms for different reasons. I think YouTube warms people up in a way that is very unique to YouTube because if you're doing longer form content, so if you're doing videos that are longer than a minute long, automatically someone knows, likes, and trusts you by the end of a video because you've spent 10 minutes with them, or even if it's only 5 minutes. The longest someone could ever spend on an Instagram page, and maybe I'm the wrong generation to ask this, but the longest I ever spend looking at someone's Instagram page is like 5 to 10 minutes. Because all of the reels are only like 10 seconds to 60 seconds. And so even if I were to scroll down someone's whole entire profile, it's different than if I were to binge someone's YouTube content where every video is 5 to 10 minutes and I spend maybe 5 hours or all day looking at this person's YouTube. And by the end, I get such a sense of who they are and what they're all about, as opposed to those like short, quick hits. So I think YouTube is a very, very powerful platform for selling online and for online businesses. Also, there's some things that are very unique about YouTube in that inherently Google owns YouTube, so it's a search engine, which is different than the way people use Instagram. So YouTube videos show up in search results on Google. Instagram profiles do, and like sometimes people use Instagram to search like places or services sometimes, but it's different than a search engine in and of itself. And YouTube as a platform also pays its creators. So like from advertising. And so in that way, YouTube, I think, does do a really great job of sending out surveys, asking creators what they want, taking into account that the entire platform wouldn't exist if people weren't creating on it. And Instagram is the same in that way, but I think because YouTube also pays you ad revenue, like they just have such a stronger relationship with the creators. That's the sense that's what I feel as a YouTube creator and as a creator on Instagram. So I think YouTube is great for all of those reasons. Instagram is great because it's a little bit of a lower barrier to entry. Like I think short form content is easier to create. Inherently it doesn't take as much time because it's shorter. And it's a little bit easier to create more content or to get that consistency if you're intimidated by YouTube.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a selfish question here because I want to know.
Great.
You have said that you're fairly new to Instagram, but I've looked at your profile and it seems like you've had some pretty wild success, like with some of your reels and such. Do you have any secrets that you can share with us? Like you've had some viral reels and stuff on Instagram. I want to know what you're doing over there.
Okay, so I've been posting, let me think about it. So I started my YouTube channel in summer of 2021. In spring of 2022, I actually, for a very short while, like paid a social media person to like repurpose my YouTube stuff onto Instagram. None of that was super helpful. It did grow a little bit, but not super well. In the early stages, I will say one thing that was very powerful is I devoted, I think, 20 minutes twice a week. And I would go in, I would find either followers of mine, or I would go explore new accounts that looked like what I wanted to do. And I would find their followers and follow them and engage with them. So that was one strategy that I did do for probably like 3 or 4 months that helped me when I was around like 800 to 1,200 followers. So that helped grow things a little bit at that point. And then later that year, so in that summer, I hired a coach and I started really learning about what it was like to create compelling copy. So how could I use my post or reel as a hook to get people to read the copy and make copy that was compelling enough that people would act on the call to action. So that's when I started getting a little more serious about like, okay, I'm creating purposeful content. And that is when things started to change. I made a goal to be really consistent. And so I think at that point I started posting 5 days a week. And then really when things started to take off in the way that you're talking about was this year. So in January of 2024, I started posting 7 days a week. And I now, like this year, I've been batching my content, which I if you listen to my podcast, like there's seasons where I batch, there's seasons where I don't batch. Right now I am batching. And what's kind of crazy is if you go to my Instagram, all of my content right now is directing people to a free event that I'm doing in June. But literally every piece of content has a call to action from like January, February, March to download a free sight reading workshop. So I am not nurturing on my Instagram. I am not doing like get to know me posts. I am literally only selling that sight reading workshop that sells my course. And that is when things really started to take off. And part of it was not because there was a magic algorithm hack. I think the consistency and the frequency of posting, I think that had some to do with it. But the other thing that I have done, and this is something that I teach clients to do, is to study my own content. So when I have a post that does well, it does well for a couple of reasons. Views are only one metric, right? If a post gets, let's say a reel gets 10,000 views, but only one person commented to download the free workshop, that's not a good post, actually. Like, yes, it quote unquote went viral, but it didn't accomplish the goal of getting people to download the free workshop. And so I would say, okay, something about that post was off. From a content standpoint, like, yes, people resonated with watching it, but I didn't do a good enough job on the call to action or on the copy to get them to download the free workshop. So what I'm always looking for is the highest number of comments specifically to like what my call to action are, like the highest number of people doing the call to action in relation to the views. So I'm actually oftentimes looking for the posts that have lower views, but a higher number of comments, right? Or ideally, I mean, it goes viral and it has a high number. And there's been a couple of those. But when I find those posts that have the highest number of comments, I copy those concepts. I copy the reel, I copy the music, I copy the aesthetic, I copy what I had in the words. Like, I try to recreate those things. So if anybody wants to go study my Instagram, you'll see from the beginning of the year, it's like the same concepts. I even copy and paste the captions sometimes. Like, it's literally the same things over and over again. And it's me experimenting with what works and what doesn't. And there are some things that have really worked. So studying your own stuff and knowing not what works for Instagram, not what works for the algorithm, but what works for you and for your audience, I think can be really powerful.
Yeah. And that goes back to the consistency. The fact that you're copying yourself helps you to be consistent. You don't have to reinvent the wheel every single day to be consistent. You can reuse, repurpose. I want to ask you one more question before we get into some of the things you have coming up. You mentioned the hook. Can you just tell us briefly what is the hook and what makes for a good hook on a piece of content?
So the hook, I think of the hook, if we're going to stick with Instagram, the hook would be like what people first see on either the first slide of the carousel or the first piece of text that they see on the reel. And then again, the hook is like the first line in the caption. If we're on YouTube, the hook is the title and also the thumbnail, and then the first like 30 seconds of the video. And so the hook is always like what grabs someone's attention in a way that's not clickbaity. Right. So you want to make sure that you're not just like coming up with hooks that are clickbaity, like you want to deliver on the hook, but studying and kind of practicing like how to create hooks that are compelling is really worthwhile, because I think it's like 8% or 80% of people only read the hook. Right. And so how much can you communicate in one hook? And then the hook has to also like draw someone's attention in. On any platform, there's so much content. So how do you create a hook that really speaks really specifically to one person and calls them out and gets them to kind of like want more? So I can give some more specific suggestions if you want me to, but that's kind of like what I consider to be the hook.
Yeah. Can you maybe give us one or two specifics from your content?
Yeah. So some hooks that, I mean, one that I love that you'll see in my content frequently is kind of the contrarian approach of like, most people think that this is this, but this is why that's not true. You'll see that often in my hooks because it works. And because if you're calling out like a really commonly held belief that you don't agree with or that isn't true, then it's really powerful, because in the hook, you're changing someone's mind. Then they're like, wait, what? I think that's true. Why is it not true? And automatically they want to read more. Other things that are really powerful in hooks are like calling out specific numbers of things. So like 3 reasons why, but I think those hooks can be really overused. So you have to like put a lot of thought into it. Numbers, statistics can be really powerful in hooks. And then things that people don't expect. So like sometimes like a hook that I've used on YouTube that will do well is like, and this is kind of contrary, and again, like why nobody should practice hand and exercises, you know what I mean? Or like why they don't work unless you know what you're doing and unless like things like that tend to work really well. And again, that kind of goes back to that original piece of advice of like, don't be afraid to stand in what you believe, because it works really well to hook people too.
This has been so helpful for me, and I'm sure for our listeners as well. Ashlee, I would love to know what is coming up for you in your business and what you're looking forward to in the coming months.
So I have, let's see, in June, I am opening Piano Practice Lab, which is a free 4-day event that I do for piano players that want to learn how to move beyond the notes and like get towards that confident musical expression. So that's coming up in June. For my podcast, I'm excited because I'm going to be traveling a lot this summer. And so it'll be fun for me to like experiment recording in different locations. And like, I'm not going to bulk record before I go. I am for YouTube, but not for the podcast. So I'm really looking forward to like, I don't know, just experiencing that. I've never done that before, of like recording on the fly and recording on the go. So that'll be really fun. And then just, making my YouTube videos and promoting my sight reading workshop and my courses.
Great. Well, tell listeners where they can find you and connect with you if they want to learn more.
Sure. So I think the best place for, if you are a business owner, then definitely the podcast would be a great place. My podcast is called The Prosperous Piano Teacher, and it's on Apple and Spotify. And I have a new episode that comes out every single Monday. And the purpose is to really help you know like how to scale and streamline your business in a way that works for your life. So that would be a great place to start. And then I'm on Instagram and I connect with a lot of teachers and entrepreneurs on Instagram. So if you want to shoot me a message or get in touch with me that way, you can always send me a DM. I would love to chat with you, love to know what resonated with you, and just make more connections.
Great. And we should mention that I'm going to be on your podcast. So this one comes out on Friday, and I believe the one with you interviewing me will be out on Monday. So if listeners want more of the Ashlee and Rachel show, they can check out your podcast.
Yes. And I'm so excited. Can I tease your listeners a little bit about what we'll talk about?
Of course.
Okay, we're going to talk about, we're going to talk about podcasts because obviously we both have a podcast. But Rachel had a launch and we were like talking on Instagram throughout her launch, and I'm so excited to break some of it down for her accompanying course. And I can't wait to like interview you about that and talk to you more about that. I know there's going to be a lot of really helpful takeaways for any business owners in that episode.
Yeah, so it's going to be completely different than this show, completely different content. So that'll be fun. All right, Ashlee, thank you so much for giving your time and sharing with our listeners today. I can't wait to continue to follow your journey and see what's next for you.
Thank you. It was such a pleasure to be here. I appreciate you having me on.
Of course. Thank you. That's the end of the show for this week. I hope you enjoyed learning from Ashlee as much as I did. If you haven't downloaded your free Top Music Mag for this month, be sure to do so. It is all about integrated piano teaching. And next week on the podcast, I'm going to be talking with a longtime friend of mine, Dr. May Sao Lim, about how to teach integrated lessons. I'm really looking forward to my interview with May, so make sure you tune in again next week. I'm Rachel Ehring, and you've been listening to the Top Music Piano Podcast. I'll talk to you again soon.
How do you keep up to date with all the latest trends and research into music education? How do you connect with other teachers around the world and make sure your teaching stays fresh and relevant for students of all ages and stages, both now and into the future? I created our Top Music Pro membership to be the one-stop shop for music teaching resources, training, support and community, and I'd love for you to come and join us inside. With over 40 comprehensive training courses, hundreds of teaching demonstrations and lesson plans, free monthly sheet music, discounts, and all the business and pedagogy support you could ever need, Top Music Pro is the community you've been looking for. If you're ready to level up your learning from the podcast and join thousands of other teachers in our global network, head over to topmusicpro.com today.